Layoffs are unfortunately on the rise, and for most of us, we worry about staying off the layoff list. But what if I told you that there are some people who are actively raising their hands and volunteering to take a severance? Well, it's true, and I actually have some direct experience myself. And in this video, I'm going to break down what exactly a voluntary layoff is and whether or not you should consider accepting one if given the opportunity. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Brian, and I'm a corporate recruiter and a career strategist. And I've made it my mission to demystify how careers and how the job search process works at major corporations. So if this kind of content interests you, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Fast Company recently reached out to me to get my take on voluntary layoffs and voluntary severance, and if there were any circumstances in which a person might want to actually raise their hand and volunteer to be laid off. Now, this sounds counterintuitive, but there's actually some circumstances where a voluntary severance may be in your best interest, but you have to be really careful. So in this video, let's break down what exactly these are and in which circumstances you may actually want to consider one if given the opportunity. So here's the article by Fast Company, and it's titled, "What are voluntary layoffs and what you need to know about them?" More companies right now are offering voluntary layoffs, and these are not necessarily new to the job market, but more and more companies are starting to look at them as a viable first step toward downsizing the workplace. And when you throw in the term voluntary in front of a separation, the package seems to have what they're saying is a new and empathetic way for companies to handle layoffs, whether it's in high tech or in higher education, which are the two most common industries where we're seeing this. I've actually seen it in manufacturing as well, so it isn't necessarily just in the tech space or in higher education. But it's kind of a humane way for people to opt out of the workplace voluntarily. And I don't know if it's a way for them to kind of feel like it's not as icky or unsavory. The reason why companies would typically do a voluntary layoff is when they're looking at workforce planning and there is a decision made that they have to start reducing cost. And so I would say this is a red flag if a company comes out with a voluntary severance program. Obviously, they're probably going to announce, we're trying to downsize 10% of the workforce, and we're looking for volunteers who might be wanting to make a change. And so what they're targeting is people who maybe are on the cusp of performance, or maybe their job type, maybe they're not super motivated in their role, or they could be somebody that's getting close to retirement and is saying, if it's lucrative enough, if they dangle a big enough carrot in front of me, maybe I'll just opt for it and retire a little early. And that's kind of what these companies are hoping for. If they don't get enough people to opt into this voluntary severance, you can expect with almost 100% certainty that they're going to move to a traditional layoff next. And that's where tricky decision-making comes in, because if you volunteer for a severance and you take it, you go off into the job market. And right now the job market's pretty crappy and it's hard for people to get back into the workplace very quickly. But if you take this voluntary severance and your name wouldn't have been called on a traditional layoff, and you're not going to really know that until the layoff happens. But if you take a voluntary severance, you're effectively putting yourself into the job market and hoping for the best. So why in the world would you ever accept a voluntary layoff? Well, here's the thing. Voluntary layoffs typically come with voluntary severances, and a voluntary severance is going to be generally more lucrative than a traditional layoffs severance package. They want to incentivize people with enough of a dangling carrot to get them to bite on it. If you take the voluntary severance, you're usually going to get a more lucrative package. But on the other hand, what if you don't get laid off and you've just volunteered to make yourself unemployed? But on the flip side, if you don't take it and then a month or two later, you end up getting traditionally laid off, you might have left some money on the table or an extension of benefits. And that's usually what the difference between the two packages is. I've seen ones where you'll get a lump sum, say it's like $10,000 or $20,000 plus whatever you would traditionally get in your normal severance. So most normal severances would have like 1 week of pay for every week that you worked at the company, or in some cases it might be 2 weeks of pay, especially if you're at higher levels in the organization. And then it might be a certain period of time where they'll pay for your benefits. There might be some career coaching or outplacement, etc. So how do you weigh whether or not you should take it? Well, that's the risk. Well, the first thing I'm going to ask is, what is my likelihood of being laid off if I don't accept it? So I'm going to look at my division, my department, my job type. Is there projects that are being sunsetted? Am I busy? Am I not busy? Is the stuff that I'm working on mission critical? Is it part of the long-term strategic plan for where the company is moving? Like if you're in your town halls and the leaders are talking about how they're going to move in a different direction and they're still evaluating the work that everybody's doing, and you're not getting a real strong sense that your role, your division, your department is part of the long-term strategic plan, there is a higher likelihood that you could be laid off. Another thing I'm going to take into consideration is my performance. Am I considered to be a top performer on the team? Am I considered to be a high potential? And even that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you won't be laid off, but it indicates a higher likelihood that you might if your performance is kind of average or below average. Then I'm going to look at what my potential impact in the organization is. Is my role revenue generating? Is it driving value? Do the senior leaders seem to have a good sense of what I'm doing and how it fits into their long-term strategic vision? And some of that stuff can be kind of difficult to assess, but I'm going to do my best to just read the tea leaves and kind of get a feel for what does my gut say here. The next thing that I'm going to do is consider where I am in my career and what I want next. The thing is, if you take this voluntary severance, it is likely that you're going to experience a turbulent job market. If you get laid off, the same thing. So I'm going to assess where I want to go in my career and what I want next. And I'm going to look at the job market itself. I'm going to go pull job postings. I'm going to go maybe throw a few resumes out there just to see if I'm getting any bites on my resume or my profile. And is the job market strong? Is there a lot of job postings? Are there a lot of employers in my local area that I could reasonably get a job pretty quickly? And you kind of have to look at it from the perspective of risk versus reward. If they're offering you a $10,000 lump sum and everything else being equal, you have to look at how long would it take you to earn that $10,000 if you were to continue working? And is it better for you to continue working and just get a traditional severance beyond that? Or should you take the lump sum and then you kind of take your chances? If it only takes you 2 months or a month and a half to make the $10,000 and layoffs aren't going to happen for another 3 to 6 months, it may not be worth you taking the voluntary severance, and maybe you should just stay working. And if you get laid off, you will have still earned more money, but it buys you some more time in order to prepare yourself, to get your networks and your resume in order and start applying to jobs. If they're offering voluntary severances, it is absolutely the time to start making sure that your ducks are in a row and take proactive steps. Don't wait for the other shoe to drop. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure you know what's being offered and know what your rights are. And I think this is actually really good advice. It may be helpful to enlist the help of a financial advisor to assess whether or not it's going to set you back in your retirement, a career coach to help you with strategy. Obviously, I think that's a crucial part of it, is understanding how the layoff will impact your job search and your long-term strategy of your career going forward. And then obviously legal counsel to make sure that everything's on the up and up and that you have a full understanding of what the agreement, the severance agreement means. Unfortunately, layoffs, whether they're voluntary or they're traditional, are here to stay. And it's kind of a new norm in our workplace. And the layoff cycle is getting shorter, as I mentioned in this article. And it used to be that we would have a layoff cycle that would happen once a decade, but ever since COVID-19, it seems to have fractured the job market. And now the layoff cycles have gone from roughly every 8 to 10 years down to basically 2 years or even shorter. And I just think that this is going to be a new norm. So having a strategy and understanding what a voluntary severance actually is and whether or not it's the right fit for you is probably going to be something that you're going to face at some point in your career. So that's what voluntary severances are. And I'm just curious, is this something that you've ever been offered? And if so, did you take it? And if you did take it, was it worthwhile to do so? Leave a comment and let me know. And just a little bit about my personal experience with it. Back in my first job after school, I was working in a role that I wasn't all that utilized. I had a new boss that had just come in. The person who hired me was no longer part of the immediate team, and I wasn't necessarily vibing with the new boss. And it just so happened to correspond with some news that the company was looking to do a major downsizing and they were going to lay off 10% of the workforce. But their first phase was to offer voluntary severances. Because I wasn't feeling all that confident in my circumstance, I actually looked at it as an opportunity to start fresh somewhere else. And I opted for the voluntary severance. I actually think I caught some people off guard. And at the time, it made sense because I felt like there was a decent likelihood that I was going to be pulled into a traditional layoff if I didn't accept it. And I ended up getting a lot more money, at least at the time. It was a bigger lump sum. They expanded the benefits package. They kind of made it a softer landing. And I used it as a chance to rebrand, ended up kind of moving to an entirely new location, tried to move into a totally different direction in my career. And it set me off in a completely different trajectory. So looking back, it's kind of, you sit there and you think, if I hadn't taken it, where would I be today? Probably wouldn't be here talking to you. So everything kind of works out in the end. That being said, if you're considering taking a voluntary severance, you just want to make sure that you're making the best long-term decision. So you need to have strategy. That's the number one most important thing. And if you're struggling with strategy, that's actually something that I specialize in. I've got a website called lifeafterlayoff.com, which is loaded with tips and tricks, all from a recruiting insider's perspective. And I offer my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. The first one being career strategy, which is admittedly something that I didn't have a lot of guidance on back then. It just so happened to work out for me, but I got kind of lucky. So with the benefit of hindsight and talking to thousands of people in my career, I've been able to map out how careers actually work at the highest levels. And I've created a very detailed course called the Ultimate Career Blueprint to walk you through exactly how to start a career and go all the way through retirement or at any phase in between. And I break down how to make the best decisions in your career so that you have strength, conviction, and authority, and you're no longer winging it. This also helps for people who are stuck at their current level and are trying to break into a leadership career path. It just gives you all the tools necessary. It's a very foundational course for your career. And then, of course, once you get into your career, there's other courses to assist you with the marketing aspect of it, like resume writing through Resume Rocket Fuel, and through interview skills, and through networking and building of a brand, so unlocking LinkedIn. And if you're somebody that's faced with a big decision and you need a little bit more personal guidance, I'm also available for some limited one-on-one coaching. You can reach me through my website for them. Anyway, I want to give you a little context on these voluntary severances, not to be taken lightly because they can drastically alter your career. So just, again, make sure that you know what you're doing when you take one. Anyway, appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.